Welcome to the final session of our video series on So the Next Generation Will Know. We've gone through a lot of data. We've gone through a lot of kind of practical applications on how to turn teaching into training. And now we're going to talk about something that I think is probably available to most of us, even though we don't think about it, and that's how to engage. Love engages. Remember, all of this is grounded, and this is why we have love in every title. We don't want to see this as, a kind of just an academic strategy. This is really about how to build relationships that provide you the template and the opportunity to share truth. And you've talked about this a number of times. I've heard you talk about stories in which you have been successful in using media, using whatever's available to you to narrate Christian worldview to your own kids. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, my son came to me. He's 14 years old, and he expressed interest in watching a movie that was one of the most popular movies of the year. His friends were talking about it. My concern is I knew that this was promoting an idea about relationships, marriage, and sexuality in conflict with Christian teaching. Okay. Now, some parents would be like, I don't want to spend my money to support that. I want to keep you away from that. That's fine. But I look at that, I'm like, wait a minute. My son has interest in this. How can I capitalize on this interest? But use it to have fun, build a relationship, but to teach him something, to help him build a worldview. So I looked online to make sure, and although it clearly had kind of an agenda pushing ideas contrary to Christianity, there was nothing explicit. It was a PG-13 movie, so I felt fine bringing him. But I said to him, I will take you and a friend whose parents approve. When we're done, here's all I ask. That we come back, and for maybe 20 to 30 minutes, we just talk about it. I'm not going to lecture you, but I just want to know what you think. Because I'm your dad. I'm not afraid of these other ideas. I want to teach you to engage them lovingly. But I also want to make sure you see some of the ideas that are in this film. Now, some people might not bite on that, but he did. So we went to this movie, and it was a fine movie. It was interesting. We came back, and he goes and sits down with his friend, and they were actually waiting on me. And I just sat down, and I said, hey, generally, did you guys enjoy it? What'd you think? Do you think there were any ideas being promoted in this movie? What were they? How did the movie try to get you to buy this idea? What are some Christian ideas maybe in the film? What are some areas where we would see relationships very differently? And we just talked, and it was a way relationally of using media to get him to build a worldview by engaging it rather than running from it.
And every one of those things you just said was a question.
It was
about you using one of the tools we always talk about, which is to ask, good questions. And you're teaching worldview. I think some of us, though, struggle with the idea of what a worldview even is, right? Like, I want to teach Christian worldview to my kids, but what does that even mean as a term? I think we have to be helpful to us to unpack that. The idea here is that worldviews answer questions for people. They provide you with a template where you can ask those kinds of questions. And the big three questions that every worldview asks are simply, how do we get here? Why is it all so messed up? And how do we fix it? Those three are, and there's lots of other questions that worldviews ask also, but those are the three, and it turns out that this is what movies usually, books, narratives do the same thing. There's always an origin, how the characters are introduced, how the predicament is set up. Then there's the predicament. There's what is the problem that has to be overcome. And then finally there's a resolution to this challenge that's in the movie.
But that's Act 1, introduction,
that's right.
Origin, Act 2,
and
problem, Act 3, resolution.
But it gives you a chance then to talk about worldview, which describes all three of those by simply talking about the acts of the movie. Now, okay, so that's fine. I get that, but sometimes I think people are still intimidated, and they want to know. Give me something practical, Sean. Give me something practical that I could even do this week, or at least give me a strategy that would help me to do it well.
So essentially what you're saying is a worldview is a story. Because at the beginning, we define it as a belief system somebody has. And that's true. We each have a worldview. Right. But our lives, we also buy into these bigger stories about where the universe came from, about why there's a problem, about what is good, about life after death. And movies tell stories. You can't tell a story without advancing some moral good. Commercials do the same thing. They advance a story. It starts off with a family driving down the road, just your typical soccer mom, and they're in a minivan, and average American family, whatever, driving down, and then all of a sudden, boulders falling down from the side of the hill. The problem. Solution, they swerve out of the way because they got the right tires. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Songs tell stories. So what I try to do with my kids is I just call it an opportunity mindset. And by the way, I do this speaking, I do this teaching. Is whenever I read the news, whenever I watch the news, whenever I hear somebody saying anything or we're in conversation, I'm looking for something. I actually take my phone out and I write it down or I email it to myself. So when we're sitting at the dinner table or I'm driving in the car or I'm just spending time with my kids, I can ask them a question and engage them to start thinking about this. Now, last time we talked about intentionality in terms of training kids. It doesn't happen by accident. This doesn't either. In the back of my mind, always I'm looking for, what's a teaching or training principle with my kid? It's a commercial. I'll show it to him. It's a song. We'll talk about it. And I'm careful not to jump by condemning these things. That'll turn our kids off and create an us versus them. I often, even in a commercial that is contrary to Christianity, I'll say, is there anything good in this commercial? Artistically, there's good. Yeah. Maybe they're trying to solve a problem that is good, but just solving it in a different way. So seeing the good and then just asking questions. And to be honest with you, I do this for a living. You and I wrote a book. Yeah. Probably more often than not, it doesn't go the way that I want it to.
That's a great
To be
point.
honest.
Yeah.
And you know, one time I was sharing something with my kids, and my son turns to me and he goes, "Good speech, Dad." And I just thought, oh my goodness, he just blew me up. And I said, and you know what? I'm going to keep speaking to you because I love you and you have to learn this stuff. And he's like, I get it. But he heard. Right. That's what's really important about doing this. So we have to have an opportunity mindset with
How
this
do you
generation.
overcome those kinds of stumbles, though? If you, I mean, there are times when I don't want to sound preachy to my kids, and this happens a lot, right? I mean, I remember having a very similar experience where I was trying to make a worldview point, and it was after one of the Godzilla movies. I talked 15 years ago when they first did a remake series of Godzilla movies, and I remember I had all in my mind how I was going to do it, and we went to go see the movie together. And on the way home, I started to try to navigate this conversation, and I am not kidding you. At some point, my son Jimmy said, "I don't want to hear anymore." Covered his ears and said, "I don't want to hear anymore." Okay, and then you feel like an idiot, right? Now, of course, the next time the opportunity comes, I'm less confident that I can even navigate. Now, we have to have
So I get that. Here's what you have to do. You just look at that and you go, okay, was the timing not good?
Right.
Did I go too long?
Right.
What can I learn from this and keep going? But also know that your kids are listening more than you realize.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean it was an utter failure, but it could mean if it's late at night, if they're tired.
Yeah. Learn from it and try again.
It could be that the problem is with us and just learn from it and move on. That's all we can do. But if I judge myself based upon my kids going, "Wow, Dad, you changed my life," that doesn't
that's going to happen.
And I remember that with my dad.
No, I'm with you.
But don't give up. And the other thing is, if you build that relationship, there's times I've said to my kids, I said, "You know what? I got to speak to you as a dad, and I need you to listen." And when I say it that way in the right time, they usually will. Yeah. And I earn a right to not preach 2 hours, but speak truth into their life. Now, I do that few and far between. Usually, we're watching a movie, something comes up, I pause it, I'm like, "You guys just see this?" Like, "Dad, play it." I said, "I know, I'll play it. But you see this, it's important to me." Right. Maybe just do it once and I move on.
I sometimes feel like I'm the dad or the guy that my kids have learned to put up with, rather than the dad who's they're gaining wisdom from, right? But I think at some point I know that even when you're sharing your faith with people who are resisting you, at some point you know that God is going to flip a switch and all the words that you've said over the last several years. And this is why I think prayer is so important with our kids, right? That we know in the end that God can do things that we can't, but we are charged. Now, I think sometimes
it's prayer. And it's relationship. So you play video games with your kid. You go to your kid's sports game. You spend that time and you develop that relational capital.
Now we've done 8 sessions in which we have really tried to encourage, but I suspect that for some people watching, it's kind of overwhelming, right? Because you're saying, well, you take your phone out and you actually put that in your phone to have that kind of a conversation. And so I guess the fear I have, and I just want to end with this, is that a lot of times it sounds like an extra burden you're asking me to add to an already too busy life. But the reality of it is that it's not an extra burden we're going to add to an already busy life. It's really about reprioritizing stuff that we are already doing that with. Because I can tell you, if we were listening to a game on the radio, I could have robust conversations about that team and who they drafted last year and who they're trying to get as a free agent right now and why that last free agent didn't work. I mean, I can already have those kinds of conversations with my kids about other things. I'm already invested in that way. Now you're asking me, well, they got to add this to all that. No, I'm saying we need to replace all that with this. We're going to have to find a way. This is why we finished our book with a postscript that says love begins, and it's at the end of the book, because the reality of it is all the stuff we're talking about, we hope initiates a journey that starts you thinking about how to do this in a different way. But it's in the end going to come down to, are we willing to love our kids enough to reprioritize our interests to help teach them a Christian worldview? So we hope that these 8 sessions have been helpful in getting you really from 0 to 50 on this issue. And thanks for bringing us into your house, into your small group to be able to speak to you on these issues. For Sean and I both, we appreciate being a small part of your life over the last 8 sessions. And that's it for us. Hope you can go out there now and help your young people to make sure that the next generation will know